And we begin with an update on what you told us yesterday about Thomas Massie, the Republican who hadn't done much to upset Trump, but he had been instrumental in the release of what has been released of the Epstein files, and that was enough to get Trump to endorse his rival.
Yes, that and the fact that he'd been very critical of the war on Iran, James. But by the time the war on Iran began, Thomas Massie's goose with Donald Trump was cooked. It was a big night for the White House last night. There is absolutely no question about that, because he not only managed to get Thomas Massie, this persistent thorn in Donald Trump's side, from Kentucky, deselected to all intents and purposes as the Republicans' candidate in the House of Representatives there. Thomas Massie went down to a crushing defeat in the Republican Party's primary. He lost by 10 points, a landslide for the Trump-backed former Navy SEAL Ed Gallrein, who now becomes the party's candidate in that House of Representatives district in November's midterm elections. This was just one of several demonstrations last night of the astonishing power and influence that Donald Trump still has over the MAGA grassroots voting bloc. He issues commands, they respond. Brad Raffensperger, the iconic figure who defended election integrity when he was Secretary of State in Georgia. You'll remember that infamous phone call when Donald Trump said to him, "I just need you to find me 11,780 additional votes." Brad Raffensperger was seeking to become the governor of Georgia. He came third last night behind two pro-Trump candidates who will now go into a runoff. All of this coming after Saturday's defenestration of Senator Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, who had voted back in 2021 to impeach President Trump for incitement to insurrection. He was taken down as a result of being targeted by the president. He becomes the first sitting member of the U.S. Senate to be deselected by local Republicans or Democrats on either side of the aisle since 2012. And Trump is not over yet. Yesterday, he endorsed Ken Paxton, the disgraced, clownish, scandal-laden former Attorney General of Texas, to become the next governor of Texas, to become the next senator from Texas, over the candidacy of the incumbent Senator John Cornyn, which, on the strength of what we've seen so far, dooms John Cornyn's chances of remaining in the Senate. And it may be an act that delivers ultimately in November that Senate seat in Texas into the hands of Democrats. But for Donald Trump, it's all about the purge now. He is getting rid of anybody who has given him gyp in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, in the party more broadly, in a bid to consolidate his power base ahead of November's midterms.
And speaking of that, the developments regarding his so-called ballroom, I mean, I don't think it is veering into conspiracy theory territory to say it sounds like he might be preparing facilities from which he would never emerge.
Yeah, or from which any president might never emerge. I mean, it was staggering yesterday. President Trump took members of the White House press corps on a tour of the building site for the project that we must all now stop calling the ballroom, because in Donald Trump's telling, the ballroom is simply a shield for everything underneath it. That's what he said yesterday. And everything underneath it is a 6-story underground fortress, a military complex. It's going to, he suddenly announced yesterday, contain a military hospital, some kind of scientific research centre. What kind of science they're going to be investigating down there, who knows? It's going to contain secret and secure rooms for military commanders and others to hold meetings. It's going to be equipped with anti-drone and anti-sniper technology and munitions. Above ground, there's going to be a viewing area where the Secret Service and members of the military will have 360-degree sweep of the whole area in the center of Washington, D.C. The entire city will be laid out before them. Whether we're talking about President Trump or any other president, if you wanted to build a fortress from which it is going to be extremely difficult, potentially, to dislodge an occupant, if you wanted to build an impenetrable military facility in the White House grounds, equipped, of course, with this new helipad that he's putting in on the south lawn of the White House, these are exactly the plans you would be implementing. And all of this talk about how he's doing it all with his own money and the money from donors, that's only the ballroom, literally the ballroom, where the Bridgerton-style dances are going to take place. All the stuff underneath, he's going to want Congress to pay for. And they are building it at a rapid clip. That became evident yesterday from that press availability.
Was there any mention of a bald head and a fluffy white cat?
I mean, we were one step away from that. It is really important to underscore. And the American media, I have to say, has missed this over the last 24 hours. If you were a James Bond villain, this is literally the kind of facility you would be building to try and see off the forces of Mr. Bond and His Majesty's government.
Indeedy. I mean, I thought originally of Thunderbirds, but they were the good guys. Nathan Gill, who has been convicted of receiving bribes from Kremlin stooges, and Nigel Farage, who hasn't. Here is the latter speaking in March of 2014 in the European Parliament.
This EU empire, ever seeking to expand, stated its territorial claim on the Ukraine some years ago. Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting. And the moral of the story is, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts.
That, as I keep stressing, is categorically not the man who has been convicted of taking bribes from a Kremlin stooge in order to punt pro-Kremlin talking points in the European Parliament. That chap is called Nathan Gill, and here he is speaking in the European Parliament in the same year, just a few months later.
The first attempt led to the overthrow of the democratically elected pro-Russian president and the current civil war which we have now in the Ukraine. With Putin up in his rhetoric, where is this going to end? The Ukraine is a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. The EU is taking away this buffer zone, potentially putting NATO tanks on the border with Russia. What you are doing today is throwing petrol onto the bonfire that the EU lit. Putin is not the biggest threat to our civilization. The biggest threat is Muslim extremists. This is for political reasons, and poking the Russian bear is very dangerous. For this reason, UKIP voted against this agreement.
Also, of course, voted against attempts to outlaw Russian propaganda from European media. Just to stress again, the first voice you heard has categorically not been convicted of taking bribes from a Kremlin stooge to raise pro-Kremlin talking points in the European Parliament. But the second voice you heard, Nathan Gill, not Nigel Farage, has been convicted of that. They both sound like admirers of Vladimir Putin, don't they? I wonder who the biggest admirer is.
I don't admire Putin. What I said was he'd outwitted and outclassed you all over Syria. I also said I didn't like him as a human being, and I wouldn't want to live in Russia.
I'm not asking,
but what I want to do, let's not meddle. Let's not meddle.
Hang on, just before you go on, you did actually say you admired him.
As an operator,
the
not as a human
question was,
being.
which current world leader do you most admire? As an operator, I would say Putin.
Yes.
So lying there, David Dimble will be reminding some of his successors at the BBC how you hold liars to account when they are lying. He's also perhaps lied about his closeness to, or knowledge of, or fondness for Nathan Gill, the man who has been convicted of taking bribes from Kremlin stooges for raising pro-Kremlin points in the European Parliament. Categorically not the case that Nigel Farage, who delivered a speech in the same year sounding rather similar, has not been convicted of taking any bribes from the Kremlin. Indeed, there is no suggestion whatsoever that he has, although some people may want to ask some questions. I am certainly not one of those people. I will ask, though, whether it's true that he barely knew Nathan Gill, as one of his more modern colleagues claimed.
But in particular, It's a big victory for Nathan Gill, our leader in Wales, an honest, decent, honourable man who's been loyal to me and the party at all times. Nathan, you've led UKIP Wales into this, and well done you.
Now known, of course, to Nigel Farage as Nathan Who. But no doubt there about precisely who Nathan Gill was. And talking of lying, it's always worth reminding ourselves of how it operates and how easy it is to make claims that are simply not true if the person you're making them to hasn't done their homework.
The ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
Sorry?
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done
But we
as an
provoked
excuse.
the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen. And of course, everyone said I was a pariah for daring to suggest it. George Robertson, former Labour cabinet minister, who went on to become the Secretary-General of NATO, has in the last couple of weeks said the war is a direct result of EU expansionism.
George Robertson later clarified that he had done nothing of the sort and responded to Farage's misinterpretation of his statement, Lord Robertson, by saying that Farage was parroting the Kremlin line. But for the avoidance of doubt, that clip came from Panorama, for the avoidance of doubt, Nigel Farage has categorically not been convicted in court of parroting Kremlin lines after receiving bribes from Kremlin stooges, but Nathan Gill, who delivered a very similar sounding speech in the same parliament just a few months previously, absolutely has. And some people will respond to Ed Davies' point in Parliament today by questioning whether there is any need for a further inquiry, a deeper inquiry into Russian interference in UK politics. But remember, I'm just asking questions. This is from a comedian friend of mine, a genuine comedian, not a self-appointed comedian like Keith. He carried the vase across the ice rink and then handed it to a man in a mask and a stripy sweater with a bag labelled swag dangling over his shoulder. So how badly damaged is Starmer? And in many ways, the Mandelson question, the Mandelson issue, is the first time you can ask how much of this is actually down to him. And in the case of Peter Mandelson's appointment, the answer has to be all of it. Nick's in Windsor. Nick, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
My belief is that Keir Starmer is now finished and there'll be a general election next year. And unfortunately...
A general election?
A general election next year, yeah.
Well, how does that work in terms of the size of the Labour majority?
So I think if they do change leader, which I think they will, I think Keir Starmer will be gone after the conference. I think his position is now...
Yeah, but how do you end up with a general election when you've got one of the biggest majorities in recent memory?
It's happened before. I think
when?
Richie Sunak spun the.
He called an election.
Yeah. So if Keir Starmer goes, you're going to have a new prime minister. And then I think they will be forced through social discontent that's currently happening. That they'll be forced. They will be forced. Absolutely. Now, I don't want to see Nigel Farage become the next Prime Minister, but I think it's highly likely he will.
What sort of social discontent? What's going on in Windsor that I don't know about?
Well, I've got more flags in Windsor than I have in London at the moment, and some of them are the US flags.
There's always been a lot of flags in Windsor, but I mean, I see some mention of social discontent on social media, and I'm aware of these tiny protests outside buildings that have been repurposed as asylum seeker accommodation. But it's just not true, is it? I mean, how does that lead to a general election?
So I think the position of the UK will become so untenable that they'll have to. The budget's going to be a total disaster on the 28th of November because there's nothing been mentioned about wealth taxes. So we're going to be... So
you're buying into the social disorder, which if you turn out to be right, then I'll have a small slice of humble pie on the programme on that morning. But you're coming at it from a Starmer hasn't been left-wing enough position.
Yeah, you've got potentially 80 MPs that are ready to cross the aisle and join Jeremy Corbyn's party, or even
where does that number come from?
So it's a number I've heard many, many times.
Yeah, but where does it come from? Because you presume they can remember what happened last time he had a crack at running the Labour Party or running a political party.
But he got more votes than Keir Starmer did at the last election.
He was also the single main reason given by people who voted for Boris Johnson for voting for Boris Johnson. So it doesn't work. That I've heard all of these arguments many times, and I don't want to sound dismissive.
No,
but none of that explains why whoever succeeds Keir Starmer would call a general election.
I think they have to, because when Keir Starmer came in, he said the adults are now in the room. The adults are in the room. Sorry, James. But
no, I'm chuckling at a text. Someone just messaged to say, "Was this chap asleep when the Tories were in power?" I don't know that whataboutery is the case, but in a nutshell, Keir Starmer hasn't been left wing enough, and all of his MPs are going to join Jeremy Corbyn's party.
Correct. And also,
start the clock. Let's wait and see. I think that's a load of old hokum, but then again, as I've said, it may well be that you're phoning me up in. Should we put a clock on it next Christmas?
Sorry, I thought you cut me up there. Sorry, I didn't realise. I think by March
of next year.
May the 7th.
May the 7th of next year. He'll have been replaced, and the new fellow would have called the general election. I mean, I'm tempted to say if that happens, I'll give you the money myself. Let's start with this fear you expressed earlier in the week that Donald Trump was essentially setting up a slush fund for friendly criminals.
Well, that's exactly what he's doing. But now, James, he is facing monumental pushback from Republicans on Capitol Hill, who are enraged about what many here are describing, many analysts are describing, as the most naked effort to engage in corrupt practices by any president in American history. And yesterday, when the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, went to Capitol Hill for lunch with Republicans, he found himself on the receiving end of huge pushback from more than 25 Republicans up on Capitol Hill, telling him that this idea that Donald Trump has forced Todd Blanche to implement. And remember, this is what happens when the traditional but not constitutionally guaranteed independence of the Department of Justice is completely eviscerated by an American president who has turned the Department of Justice now not only into his personal office of retribution, but also into an ATM, a cash machine, potentially for his mates. If we just spin back, you will remember that Donald Trump's businesses and his tax returns were being audited by the IRS, the American equivalent of HMRC. Some of those tax returns leaked to the American public. Donald Trump, as president, sued his own government for $10 billion, sued the government over the leaking of those tax returns. The case ran into all sorts of difficulty in court. It was then that the Trump administration said to Todd Blanche, OK, we're going to pull this lawsuit, but in exchange, we want this slush fund created. $1.776 billion, 1776, it's the 250th anniversary of American independence, that is going to be made available to people who claim that Joe Biden unleashed weaponized lawfare against them. In other words, politically motivated prosecutions. Now, the Trump family would not be eligible for that cash. We were told initially that all they were getting as out of this whole arrangement was an apology over the leaking of some of the tax returns. In fact, 24 hours later, we also learned that what the Trump family, the president himself, and the Trump organization was receiving was complete immunity, an agreement by the IRS that it would not pursue any claims on past tax returns. I mean, that had the potential to save the Trumps about $100 million in possible penalties that they might have been looking at as a result of IRS enforcement.
I mean, why would you need that in place if you hadn't done anything wrong?
Well, I mean, precisely. And, we don't know if the audit was still ongoing. Jeez. I mean, certainly a couple of years ago, one of Donald Trump's sons indicated that it was. Yeah. But then this idea also to set up this fund that anybody who can claim they were victimized and weaponized by the Biden administration could go after the cash raised huge questions about whether that meant the January the 6th insurrectionists would be eligible for the cash. Clearly they would be, including some January the 6th insurrectionists who have since been convicted of other crimes and returned to jail, including one particular case of a January 6th insurrectionist later arrested on child molestation charges. So members of Congress were sort of asking in open hearings the acting Attorney General, would that figure be eligible for some of this cash? And he absolutely sidestepped the question. So the Trump administration now has found that every camel's back has a straw that breaks it.
Why?
And
Why
in the
now?
case of this weaponization fund, it's the Republicans that are demonstrating some spine and turning around to Trump and saying, we're not doing this.
Why now?
Well, because
it's not the worst thing he's done. It's not the worst thing he's done, is it?
No, I mean, it's up there.
Yes,
it's certainly up there with many of the worst things that he's done. But the answer to your question is because they are angry with him. They are angry over the way in which he has purged the party, effectively, of some of their friends. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana last week, thrown out by Republican voters in Louisiana as the in a primary contest as the result of Donald Trump's intervention. They're furious about what the president is doing down in Texas, endorsing a scandal-ridden, impeached former Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, in many ways the Donald Trump of Texas, endorsing him over their friend, the incumbent Senator John Cornyn. And they're also terrified for their own skins. They're about to go home for the Memorial Day weekend. They are going to face so much anger from their constituents in their home states, as we also wait to see whether the price of petrol here is going to tick up on average above $5.02 a gallon, the high point that it hit in Joe Biden's presidency. There's every indication that that's going to take place. Bond markets are soaring, credit's getting harder to find here. I can tell you here in Washington, D.C., the property market is at a complete standstill. The Fed is going to have its hands tied again by economic circumstances and won't be able to do Donald Trump's bidding in terms of dropping interest rates. So those lawmakers are terrified for their own futures as they prepare to face voters in November and realise how many of these president's policies, including this sort of naked act at corruption, is just resulting in enormous pushback from the country.
So, I mean, we're not going to have time to talk about Cuba, but it's fairly easily explained as he's desperately trying to distract attention away from all the things that you're talking about by potentially starting another war or doing another Venezuela. But after we last spoke, it occurred to me that Trump's patronage is still essential to get the Republican nomination, but it is probably a net negative when that nominee actually fights the election. So it's as if the stamp of Trump gets you the Republican nomination but hobbles you when you actually are up against a Democrat.
Yeah, if you're Donald Trump, you can pick off individual Republicans that have crossed you.
Yeah.
But if we're now at the stage where 25 Republicans in the US Senate yesterday crossed you, do you really have the juice to pick all of them off? Almost certainly not.
Aggie Chambray, our deputy political editor, is here. Now, if I wanted to channel the spirit of Claire Coutinho at this point, I'd say, why are you here?
It would be a great question. I mean, I'm here because Natasha Clark is...
Why are you here? You weren't here last week.
No, I know. So that was strange, wasn't it? Yeah. Because we all know why David Lammy is standing in. David Lammy is the Deputy Prime Minister. He is standing in for Keir Starmer at Deputy Prime Minister's questions because Keir Starmer is at the G7, and whenever Keir Starmer's there, it means that David Lammy's there, and then it means that there's some sort of deputy for the Conservatives, although they love keeping us on our toes, and they just put up whoever they want to talk about, whatever topic they want.
Is that because Badenoch doesn't want a deputy? She doesn't want anybody to have a power base around which anybody may gather, or is it... Oh, well, sorry, what a silly question. It's because she's a political genius.
I think it is genuinely because on days like today, they don't want David Lammy to have too much time to prep and work out exactly what's going to be asked. So they keep everyone on their toes and then they...
Political genius. She's a political genius.
That is one way of putting it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how she puts it.
That's how she puts it.
Absolute political genius.
Or at least getting there to political genius, getting better every day.
But he seemed to know exactly what was coming because he had her CV in front of him, and indeed her track record of being in favour of all the things that she is now professing to be opposed to, from net zero down.
Indeed. So Claire Coutinho is, of course, the shadow energy secretary, the shadow net zero secretary. And she wanted to talk about, although she didn't actually mention it, that crucial by-election that we spent so much time covering, of course, the one in Aberdeen South, not actually the one in Makerfield. And that is because some people, some Conservatives locally are basically saying that represents a referendum on oil and gas. And she effectively, I think, wanted to punch the bruise that there is among the Parliamentary Labour Party and the disagreements on where they stand on new licences in the North Sea. We also have had one of the Labour supporting unions, GMB, talking about this too and being very critical of where Labour and indeed Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, stand on this. So she began by asking why Labour was happy to get its oil and gas from Russia or Qatar, but not Aberdeen. And Lammy then talked about the fact that she was a Treasury Minister during the biggest fall in living standards for decades, and then said, and he said this a few times, James, don't believe everything you read in the papers. She went on to ask how many jobs had been lost in Aberdeen. And Lammy talked about, as you mentioned, the fact that she used to champion net zero when she was Energy Secretary. And she then talked about the fact...
Which is just true.
Which is factually true, yep. And she then said that 1,000 jobs are being lost in the oil industry a month, which is also what... industry sources do say as well. He then said she got her facts wrong. And then, perhaps unsurprisingly, she turned on to these reports reported by Patrick Maguire in the Times that Ed Miliband has been basically ghosting the Prime Minister. He was trying to... Keir Starmer was trying to cool Ed Miliband, and Ed Miliband just wasn't really getting back to him, which is pretty extraordinary. Of course, this comes after there were reports as well that Ed Miliband, which haven't really been denied, that Ed Miliband basically called for Keir Starmer to go and said that he should set out a timeline in the days before the local elections. And obviously things are pretty frosty between the pair of them. It has been the fact that Ed Miliband's ghosting Keir Starmer has been denied by a source close to Ed Miliband, but still pretty awkward. And then that gave David Lammy the opportunity to say, once again, don't believe everything you read in the papers or stop reading the papers. And Claire Coutinho then made a little joke about the Cabinet getting a pay cut soon, and also managed to get onto the sort of domestic politics of talking about potentially Ed Miliband becoming Chancellor, Louise Haigh, the former Transport Secretary, Angela Rayner potentially coming back into the Cabinet too. So she had a bit of a jibe there. And of course, couldn't get through a whole Deputy Prime Minister's questions without mentioning defence.
Indeedy doody. I think, speaking of defence, Tony tells me that Claire Coutinho may have been pointing at Dan Jarvis when she said, "Why is he here?" And not talking, because I mean, certainly if you were listening exclusively to the audio, it sounded like she was talking to David Lammy, but
that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that would actually make some sort of sense, albeit and drawing attention, of course, to the resignation of John Healey, which, of course, it was also reported this morning, blindsided Keir Starmer because he was so worried that Ed Miliband might have been about to resign. We should probably add that the account of this so-called ghosting was rejected by a source close to Miliband. According to the people that reported the ghosting, who said that the pair eventually spoke and denied that Miliband declined to take the Prime Minister's calls. It's a funny one, isn't it? Because, I forget the exact details, but the CBI published data last week or the week before about 1.1 million UK workers in the net zero economy, and I think £105 billion in gross value added for the UK economy, but it's not either or. You know, if they were to issue new oil licences, it would compromise net zero commitments, but it wouldn't mean that any of the people in the net zero economy were to lose their jobs. Their earnings currently 11% higher than the current national average, but as Claire Coutinho pointed out, possibly as much as 50% less than what they might expect to earn in the oil sector. Does it work? Does it have traction, this? Does it? I mean, it does in Aberdeen, but beyond?
Well, it does in Aberdeen, and the by-election for Aberdeen South is tomorrow. So if the Conservatives are able to win that, and speaking to people in the party, they feel reasonably confident and reasonably hopeful. Kemi Badenoch has gone a few times to the constituency. She's called it...
Oh, lucky them.
She's called
Seriously,
it...
what would I... Do you think she'd ever come and see me if we were having a by-election?
If you played your cards right.
Oh, it'd just be great. It's just so cool.
But she's called
a full list of candidates, as ever, is is available at lbc.co.uk. This is due to Stephen Flynn moving into the Scottish Parliament, isn't it, this one? So it is SNP versus...
SNP versus Tories, exactly that.
With a full list of candidates, as ever, available at lbc.co.uk. My inbox is mostly pro-Lammy, I think. Let me find a few examples for you. Almost entirely pro-Lammy, except one. Charles wants to know why on earth they never answer the question about drilling in the not pretty sound thrashing from Lammy there. Pathetic performance. Even Kemi would have done better. That's Lauren and Alan. Why does she insist that North Sea gas would somehow make our energy cheap? That's one of those things that's got halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. We'd still be paying for it on the open market wherever it came from. But the bit about jobs is therefore a more salient point to go in on. Lammy is, in football terms, a seasoned pro. It is very weak gruel. Lammy is right. And just trying to find something a bit warmer for Claire Coutinho. Why is Lammy here? Oh no, that's Steph. I think falling into the trap I fell into of thinking that Claire Coutinho was talking about David Lammy when she said, why is he here this week? When if you were watching it closely on a screen, you'd have known that she was pointing at Dan Jarvis. This is weak stuff from Coutinho. And Kate says she really can't land the punchline. Bring back Kemi. Couldn't agree more. Whatever the context, whatever the story, we want more Kemi. Kemi. This is cringeworthy. Why is he here? Because the Prime Minister is at the G7. Oh, mate, OMG, Tories have abandoned any concern about net zero. God, she's even worse than me at telling jokes, says Karen. And finally, Lauren says, oh, Lammy brought receipts. So Kemi will be delighted.
Kemi will be delighted. I didn't think Claire Coutinho was that bad, actually.
I don't think I did either.
And it was her first time ever doing Deputy Prime Minister's questions. And
this last makes Kemi look like Aristotle.
Wow.
Said James. Of course, we don't know what Aristotle would have sounded like because we rely, I think, upon... Don't we rely upon... Oh, no, we do know. I'm getting him mixed up with Socrates. An easy mistake to make. No, she was fine.
I think she was fine. And also, I thought David Lammy... He had a few things that he sort of kept saying, which was stop reading the papers, don't believe everything you say in the papers, and talking about her record, which is, of course, a Labour favourite. But he didn't properly engage with that many of the questions. I actually don't think it was his best performance, and I don't think she was terrible.
I would probably agree with you. Not quite a score draw, but a hard one, narrow victory, probably. That's it. I mean, hey, it's risky, this. It's live radio, and I haven't checked. I could be wrong. I could have missed the big North Korean trade deal. I think that they're celebrating the defection of a senior North Korean diplomat to the West today. So it seems highly... But anyway, there we go. I mean, let's chalk that up as a misspeak. Do you know, Natasha Clark? I hope I'm not breaking any state secrets when I said this. I went past... Do you know where the North Korean embassy is?
I don't think I do, no.
It's an entirely normal suburban house in Ealing.
Oh, really?
It's up near Hanger Lane, just at the top end of Gunnersbury Park.
How did you know it was the...
I was on a bus, as is my wont, and I saw a flag, which, you know, happily, the part of London that I'm talking about hasn't been polluted by tatty St. George crosses and the sort of lamppost climbers, but it was a flag I didn't immediately recognise, so I found myself thinking, I wonder what that is. And I tried, I squinted, Natasha, I craned my neck and I squinted trying to see what the plate on the gatepost said, and I couldn't. But it was a big old flag, and like quite an official looking flag. And of course I remembered the power of technology, and so I got one of the map apps out and had a little look, and it was the...
Did you scan it with your phone?
I didn't need to do that. I could just look at the map, and it had on the map the embassy of North Korea, and it's... I mean, you know, you go down Kensington or you go to some of the big old embassies. I've had the pleasure of visiting a few. The French one's lovely down by Holland Park, all around there, and then you're just sort of on a bus.
Somewhere in Ealing.
It's somewhere in Ealing, and you see a blooming embassy. Anyway, I digress. Let me read at random messages that have come in during PMQ. Sarah writes, what a shouting rabble. I'm sure the country have had enough of this circus-like carry-on. I hope it doesn't cost us taxpayers anything. Starmer has destroyed her, says Gav. Open goal and she's hit the post. As for the line on a patronising tone, goodness me. That's a recurring theme, as you'll see. For someone who isn't a socialist, writes Alex, Kemi Badenoch sure does love being publicly owned. Ben writes, she's booted it over the bar again. How does Badenoch stand in front of Starmer and still come out looking weak, asks Joe. It's kind of impressive, really. New oil and gas licences wouldn't get us oil or gas for years to come. It's a lie for her to say that it would improve prices now. How has Kemi Badenoch done this badly at PMQ? views?" asked Neil in Skipton. "This woman is totally unbearable, appalling, unable to run any country, arrogant ass." I think I can say that on the radio. I just did. Badenoch sounds like a very bad teenage debater channeling Mean Girls. Is she all right? Asks James. Is she actually all right? God, this is awful. It's like my 4-year-old daughters, plural, arguing with each other about who said what. Pathetic, says Jordan in Devon. And I'm just trying to find a positive one. I think the most positive one is Jordan actually treating them with equal contempt. And Will throws in, oh dear, this is from Andy. Badenoch remains brain-numbingly unable to get a grip on anything, so unserious, so uninformed, woeful as usual. And many of you picking up, as Tom does, on her calling anybody else pompous or condescending is irony personified. Will asks, who's getting bungs from the fossil fuel companies, I wonder? Well, I, in a similarly cynical tone, wonder whether or not anybody remembers the Conservative Friends of Russia, of which various MPs and I think that Matthew Elliott chap who went on to ran the Taxpayers Alliance and Vote Leave and all that, he was also a founding member of the Conservative Friends of Russia. But it's nice to see that she's discovered the dangers of that proximity shortly after Boris Johnson put the son of a KGB agent in the House of Lords. Natasha, what did you make of that?
Look, I don't think there was a particular goal there for Kemi Badenoch, was it? It was open, and I don't know if she scored. I think she was pretty good on holding the Prime Minister's feet to the fire on these allegedly lifting of these sanctions on Russia.
It's awful. It's awful that Russia gets anything positive out of this, but having listened to that exchange, I'm not entirely sure who's getting what and why.
Yes, so Keir Starmer says that these claims the government are easing sanctions on Russia is misrepresenting the facts, but it is clear that there is a loophole where Britain will be able to import oil essentially from Turkey, from India, without those sanctions on Russia. So it feels like there is a loophole. Whether it is a new loophole or it's one that we've just not all realised until now is unclear. He says, the Prime Minister says, this is a new package of sanctions. None of the existing sanctions are being lifted in any way. This is not less pressure on Russia, it's more. But the government have said in the past that they want to clamp down on this, and they want to make sure that no oil from any ally of Russia is getting through in any way to us. But the government this morning were pretty clear that, Dan Tomlinson was speaking to us this morning on LBC, and he didn't deny that there was this big loophole here, and he basically said, we've got a jet fuel shortage, we need to make sure we're looking after our citizens. So there is a sort of moral argument in terms of what's happening in terms of Russia.
And I mean, I sit here outraged, potentially, or anyone sits here outraged, potentially, and what happens when your holiday gets cancelled?
Exactly.
That's the dilemma that governments, whoever's in power, have to deal with.
Yeah, and look, I haven't specifically read the oil and gas licence, which was released late last night and did appear to be a change in government position. The government has come out today and basically said, we are doing this because we want to support people here in Britain. There is, on the other hand, a sort of moral question about how far our support goes for Russia. And, the UK has been... for Ukraine. The UK has been square behind Ukraine since the outbreak of this war. And it does look like the sort of moral superiority of people who were sort of, looking at this issue and go, oh, Donald Trump's done it, so, this is a bad thing to do. Why on earth is he doing it? Now, if we're doing it, it's a pretty bad look. But equally, around the world, we're all facing these jet fuel shortages and potentially squeezing on prices too. But we should mention the Prime Minister did start Prime Minister's Questions by announcing that 5p cut to fuel duty will be extended for the next 12 months. Obviously, that's good news. It's hard for if you're already at the pumps, but...
I hate to contradict you. I mean, it's good news, obviously, if you're very closely watching the price of petrol, but the reason why fuel is expensive is because of the war in the Middle East, and this is actually bad politics. It's populism.
Is it
you
just
should explain
masking?
What you're saying to the public, the reason why your petrol is expensive is because Donald Trump attacked Iran and they've shut the Strait of Hormuz. Here's 5p. So...
It's a drop in the ocean.
It's childish politics because it doesn't actually recognise the reason why. It's the same with supermarket prices. It doesn't recognise the reason why things are expensive. It's just saying, don't worry, we'll help you. Yeah. But anyway, that's a pet peeve.
And also, it doesn't take into account that the government, under many governments, tax fuel so incredibly highly. So a big proportion of why it's so expensive is because the government charge us loads of money whenever we fill up at the pumps. So there's a multitude of reasons. But Keir Starmer obviously trying to get ahead of questions about Andy Burnham and talk about, a little freebie, a little giveaway.
I thought, and I didn't have the chance to tell you this on air, I told you off air while we were listening to it, I thought that she'd go in big on Mandelson again. She's handled Mandelson quite well, and there was just a nodding retrospective reference to it, but they're still facing accusations of a cover-up. Emily Thornberry's still unhappy, saying that and the full details, it's our own little Epstein files, isn't it? The full details have still not been published.
Yeah, Darren Jones got a real hard time in the Commons yesterday when he announced that the government would not be releasing them this week, as indeed has been promised.
If I was Kemi Badenoch, I'd have been all over that today.
I think, to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, she probably will have another opportunity to do this at some other point when those files do get released. We're told there's 300 documents that are due to be released, and it's probably going to be the first week of June when that happens. So there will be that opportunity for Kemi Badenoch in order to do that. But clearly she felt that oil and gas was something to go on because the Prime Minister was trying to get ahead of us with this announcement.
Indeedy. Ed Davey, I think he's at his weakest when he's not serious, oddly. I don't mean dressing up as a honey monster and jumping out of aeroplanes. I'm trying to do that joke about, do you agree with Andy Burnham and Wade? He could have got, I thought he was going to go in.
Something we could agree on here.
I thought he was going to go in harder on that.
I thought so too.
Guess what happened in, I think I was aware of this at the time. Actually, it's 12 years old, this story. North Korean officials paid a visit to a London hair salon to question why it had used their leader Kim Jong-un's picture in a poster offering haircuts. The poster in the M&M Hair Academy in South Ealing.
I hope they'll be having a word with Keir Starmer for talking about that trade deal.
That's incredible. Well, he's already corrected it.
Has he? Thank
Yes.
goodness for that.
Oh, thank God for that, Keith. I thought I was going out on quite a limb there, suggesting that he'd misspoken. So it is true. Not only is this Ealing Embassy story completely true, but it also has an agreeable postscript involving a hair salon.
Well, they've got to have an embassy somewhere, don't they?
James, are you going to mention Farage getting triggered by a T-shirt in light of some of the comments he has made previously? Are we looking at two-tier snowflakery, asks Mike. I don't think we are. Well, I mean, yeah, we probably are. But I was racking my brains earlier. If you're not across this story, Zach Polanski has apologised for and deleted a photograph he put on Instagram that shows a man wearing a T-shirt that has the phrase, "We're only making plans for Nigel," alongside a photograph of a guillotine. I mean, Nigel Farage has reported Zach Polanski for inciting murder, which, of course, people who've been arguing furiously in recent years that free speech means you should be able to say exactly what you want and whatever you want on social media will probably struggle with the violence of that reverse ferret. But Polanski immediately apologised as soon as it was pointed out to him what he'd done alongside 20 images. One of them contained this picture. He deleted it and apologised, and the spokesperson said that he had done so without realising that there was more to it than he had seen, which seems reasonable to me. And I was trying to think of another politician who'd said something about taking a knife to the civil service a few years ago. And I thought I'd imagined that, because Nigel Farage talked about picking up a rifle if Brexit wasn't done. Nobody actually thought he was going to go out and shoot anybody, did they, when he said that? But I still don't think he should have said it. Nobody seriously thinks that this bloke in the T-shirt is inciting the murder of Nigel Farage, but he still shouldn't have worn it. It's an unnecessary extremity. It's perfectly capable or perfectly possible to critique politicians in the roundest way without ever bringing possible death into the conversation or violence, physical violence into the conversation. So I was desperately trying to remember who it was who had said that that he would take a knife to civil servants. And I should have remembered, actually, that it was indeed Nigel Farage.
I suggest we listen to them and not the overpaid pen pushers in Whitehall who are not doing a neutral job, and once Brexit's done, we'll take the knife to them.
Nobody actually thought that he was inciting the stabbing of civil servants when he said he was going to take a knife to civil servants. And he acknowledged it himself later when he said, "I should have said take the axe," which is a more traditional term for cuts. So this weird two-tier offence seems to be really kicking in at the moment, doesn't it? There's no way that Zach Polanski was encouraging anybody to kill Nigel Farage any more than Nigel Farage was encouraging anybody to stab civil servants. But they both, one accidentally and one very deliberately, one posted a photograph, one actually gave a speech in which they used violent imagery in relation to other human beings, whether a politician or a civil servant. So both bad. Nigel Farage was investigated by police, who elected to take no action, and I suspect that the same conclusion will be the one with Zach Polanski. But it's a bit odd for somebody who has been on the receiving end of this kind of inquiry and argued that they'd done nothing wrong, to now be arguing that a picture of a guillotine would somehow incite murder. But they are complaining about the strangest things at the moment, that lot, despite having campaigned for years on a quotes free speech end quotes platform. So just bringing you up to speed with that story, and that's not the time that Nigel Farage said he was going to pick up a rifle if Brexit was frustrated, or the time he said that Brexit had achieved without a single shot being fired, which must have been very uncomfortable listening for Joe Cox's family. This is the time that he said he was going to take a knife to the civil service. But Zach Polanski accidentally, by his own account, posting a photograph of a man in a T-shirt with a guillotine on it, saying, "We're only making plans for Nigel," that apparently could be incitement to murder. What a strange period of history we are living through together. Farage has said, if I was to post anything as insightful, then I would expect to be arrested, and so should Polanski. Polanski, as soon as this picture was brought to his attention, immediately took it down, and a spokesman has said he condemns the image on the T-shirt. He was tagged in a post with 20 images and clicked accept without realising there was more to it than he had seen. I don't know whether technically he's apologised, but he's condemned the image on the T-shirt, and the spokesman went on to say it's clearly in poor taste, especially at the time of heightened fears for the security of public figures. Having experienced multiple threats himself, why can't they all agree not to use words like knife or rifle? And I don't think Zach Polanski would argue with that. Don't post pictures of guillotines. Don't say that you're going to knife civil servants. Don't say that you're going to pick up a rifle if Brexit doesn't work. Check your Instagram for photographs that are potentially violent, and don't post them accordingly. So the idea that you could use this to sort of claim that one side is better or worse than the other is obviously silly, whereas what you should really be doing is calling upon all politicians, especially given recent events, to stop using language or imagery of violence. If they've done it accidentally, then make immediate amends. If they've done it on purpose, then look to your own record. The police, to give you the third quote, we received a third-party report relating to an image shared on social media. We take reports of this nature seriously, and officers are conducting inquiries into the matter, just as they did when Nigel Farage said that he was going to take a knife to the civil service. I suppose now we just have to wait for Elon Musk to claim that this is proof that you can't say what you want in this country without getting arrested. I do apologise for not being more across it, but of course, if you post a picture by Zach Polanski's account by accident on Instagram, then you are inciting murder and should be arrested. If you are actually convicted in a British court of inciting racial hatred on social media, meanwhile, this is what Nigel Farage thinks should happen.
Our Planet Normal guest this week has become a living symbol of two-tier Britain. The sheer injustice she has suffered has shocked millions of people across Britain and indeed across the whole world. She's a wonderful mum, wife, beloved childminder, little kids from every corner of the earth she's taken wonderful care of. So I am, of course, referring to Britain's favourite political prisoner. Ladies and gentlemen, please give the warmest of welcomes to Lucy Connolly.
So, I mean, just to recap on what a mad period of history this is, if you are guilty of inciting racial hatred, or indeed violence, by tweeting "mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the B words for all I care," while you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them, you're a heroine, you're a folk hero, you're a political prisoner. If you, by Zach Polanski's account, accidentally post a picture of a man in a T-shirt with an XTC lyric on it about making plans for Nigel and a picture of a guillotine, then you are inciting murder and should be arrested. For the avoidance of doubt, politicians should never use imagery or language that is violent, in my humble opinion. And for the avoidance of doubt, no politician should ever countenance treating a convicted criminal or a criminal convicted of incitement to racial hatred like a folk hero, let alone an entire party conference for a political party. But there are some things that everybody has to agree on. and this should be one of them. Unfortunately, if you've got somebody who routinely talks about picking up rifles or knifing civil servants, claiming that a T-shirt is profoundly offensive and Lucy Connolly is some sort of folk hero, you've got hypocrisy on a scale that is almost impossible to process. But there it is. So you get a hero's welcome, like a sort of X Factor winner, on stage at a party conference if you're convicted of inciting racial hatred. But if you post a picture of a man in a T-shirt with a guillotine on it and a reference to an XTC lyric containing the word Nigel, then you should be arrested and you're inciting murder. You don't have to pick a side on this. You just have to treat all events, all moments equally. And if you do, you'll be as confused as I am about recent events. But I am contractually obliged now to cross live to Downing Street, where our political correspondent, Aggie Chambray, is holding a microphone.
Good morning, James. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is about to come out of number 11 Downing Street, where, as you point out, I am standing right outside. This morning, she has already held the cabinet meeting with the Prime Minister, where they've gone through that budget, her second massive budget, signed it off. The Prime Minister has left for Prime Minister's questions a few minutes ago. And Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, we are all waiting, the entire British press pack, waiting in Downing Street for her to come out so we can all shout a question at her and see that brilliant image of her holding up that iconic red box. And this is a massive moment, not just the red box, although that
Hang on, I'm just ticking. I'm just ticking iconic. Well done. We've got iconic. Carry on, Aggie.
Thank you. Perfect. It's a massive moment because it's her second budget. But if her critics are to be believed, it could also be her last budget. And there are so many audiences for this budget too. She keeps on saying it's a cost of living budget. She's taking the tough decisions for it to tackle cost of living. And I think those words are really for the Parliamentary Labour Party, a sort of Parliamentary Labour Party facing budget. And I don't think that's necessarily what we expected. But there's been so many leaks, briefings, U-turns. Do you remember the income tax? We all thought income tax was going to rise for a couple of weeks because Rachel Reeves did that speech, that iconic speech where she basically strongly implied it was going to rise. And then basically the FT said it wasn't, and now it seems like it's not going to happen. So instead there's going to be this smorgasbord of tax rises. Why isn't it happening? Well, it seemed like Labour MPs were basically just too concerned about there being a break in the manifesto pledge. That was, of course, one of the things she did during the manifesto to sort of box herself in, really. And she said at the time it would be a nice problem to have. Well, it's a pretty big problem to have now. So it's a PLP facing budget. Well, what does that mean? It means she's going to do several things, like we think she's going to lift the 2-child benefit cap, something that is deeply popular with Labour MPs and actually not popular with the country. She's also going to raise the minimum wage. Again, very, very popular with Labour MPs, not popular with business, who are the other audience of this budget, who she, I think, should be concerned about too. The other things we know, she's going to keep the triple lock. Again, popular with the party, not necessarily popular with the country. And one of the big ticket items that we think is going to happen, we expect to happen, is to freeze income tax threshold, something she said she wasn't going to do. Again, actually unpopular with the country, but popular with the markets, her other big audience for this absolutely huge budget.
What does he...
So I'm just waiting, James.
I know you are. And I mean, if you keep asking yourself questions like this and answering them, Aggie, I'm not going to be able to get a word in edgeways. Now I know what it's like to be a caller to this programme. So, I mean, you're doing two things at once. You're not only talking, but you're also looking repeatedly over your shoulder to see if the Chancellor is coming out of the House. Any thoughts on what question you might shout at her in certain knowledge that she won't answer it?
Absolute certain knowledge that she won't answer it. I think I'll probably ask whether this is a budget about her own survival and whether she thinks it will be her last. I suppose the advantage of getting to ask a question that she won't answer is you can ask quite a rude question.
Yes.
But there sort of isn't really an answer to. She probably doesn't know whether or not this will be her last budget, but I can ask her anyway.
That's a mystery hour answer, Aggie, that you've just provided, because people have rung in to ask, why do journalists always shout at politicians coming out of Downing Street even though they never get an answer? And the point is, the question is the point, not the answer. You could shout, have you had your Weetabix, Chancellor?
It's a great question, yeah. Well, she would never answer it. I think that the original reason for those shouts is sort of a TV thing, isn't it? Because she comes out and you use it at the beginning of a TV package, but now it's such a thing that we do it on radio too, and it's, you know, it's a moment, and it sort of is supposed to encapsulate what the budget is about. And I think encapsulating who this is for, whether it's actually about her own survival and whether this will be her last are kind of the key questions about today, really.
And although even more guaranteed than usual that she won't answer any of them. And you mentioned TV, of course. The television station is currently focusing on a door that is currently closed. That is the big news of the moment as we await Rachel Reeves' emergence from said door. The television companies are united in their determination to focus the cameras on that door. And there's Aggie again, just moving into our shop. Because although this is nominally a radio station, this is the 21st century, and you can watch a lot of this, should you so desire, on the LBC app, on Global Player. In fact, you can watch PMQs and the budget in its entirety on the LBC app, and indeed on Global Player. PMQs and the budget live and in full on the new LBC app. Sheila Fogarty will be joining you after that. It's all streamed live with all the reaction, and she's let us down, Aggie. I've got to get on with the programme. It's 24 minutes after 11, give or take a few seconds, and the Chancellor still hasn't appeared.
What does that say about her? It's not great, is it? We were promised 11:20.
Maybe she's changing her mind. Aggie, we're gonna work out what it would sound like for you to describe her coming out through the door. But if you could just shout your question for the listeners, even though the Chancellor's not there yet, could you do that, or would you be too embarrassed doing it in front of all your colleagues?
Yeah. I wouldn't be embarrassed at all, James. I would do it. I'd do it for you.
Go on then.
Is this budget about your own survival? Will it be your last?
Thank you. We can edit that and make it sound like you did it while she was actually within earshot.
The door is opening. Rachel Reeves is standing outside number 11 Downing Street. She's walked out with that iconic red box. She's standing amongst her Treasury ministers. We have Dan Tomlinson. She's standing forward next to James Murray. Torsten Bell there too, of course. And she's showing the world's media that iconic red box. Now, of course, it is not the same red box as it was when it was first made. That was in 1860 for William Gladstone. That is not the same red box as that. Now, I'm just going to do my shout here, James.
Come on.
Chancellor, is this budget about your own survival? Will it be your last?
I think she flinched. She flinched.
That's almost her answering, James.
She flinched. I swear she flinched. Well, actually, there's probably a delay. She's probably flinching at someone else. But anyway.
No, I think she did flinch.
I think she flinched. I think, well done, Aggie. You've got to flinch. You've got to flinch. Live on LBC, brilliant. Live on the app if you're watching. She looks lovely. I know that's not probably... I wouldn't say that about Philip Hammond, so it might be sort of borderline misogynistic, but she does look lovely. I love that outfit.
So it's a good outfit. I think it's a fair enough thing to say when it's a very cool suit.
And did they arrange themselves in...
She's walking.
She's now walking. Jeremy Hunt looked very robotic at this point in proceedings. I'm delighted to report that Rachel Reeves does not. Did they arrange themselves in height order there?
She doesn't look robotic. She's not smiling.
No, well, you wouldn't, would you? I mean, not with that level of questioning that she's just been exposed to, Aggie. You've just ruined her day. You've just ruined her day. And she's off in a car. The door is closed. The car has
driving
gone.
Off.
That's it now. Are you clocking off for the rest of the day, Aggie?
I'll pop in later just to check everything's okay, but I think my job here is done. I made the Chancellor flinch.
You did indeed. Well done. A live flinch there. A world exclusive, sort of.